Tanzania, Tanzania. Well, and with that intro from Cape to Cairo, we bring you an exclusive sit-down with the Egyptian ambassador to South Africa as we discuss Egypt Air and how they've managed to have their sailing all the way from Cairo to Cape, and what we always call from Cape to Cairo. But first, coming up on the show, here is what you can look forward to. I'm Aldrin St. Pierre, and you are watching African Perspective. Today on the show, the imminent retirement of Lesotho's Prime Minister Tom Thabane. We also look at the Libya Peace Summit, which ended with a ceasefire agreement, but General Haftar refuses to sign. Then a wide-ranging interview, as I've just indicated in that introduction, with the Egyptian ambassador to South Africa. And remember that you can interact with us on Twitter using the handle @AfricanSpec. And let's start off with this story. Schools have opened in Kenya for the first time of the new year, but high levels of food insecurity in urban slums, as well as some rural areas in the country, have forced many children to remain at home. With the government-led feeding scheme not able to reach all needy children, one man has stepped up and offering a cup of millet porridge to at least 3,900 children across the country. Sarah Kimani went to see what Francis Amond is doing to keep the children in school.
It's just after 8 in the morning, the beginning of a new school day. Time for Francis and staff at Love School Center in Nairobi's Kawangware informal settlements to prepare a meal of millet porridge for just over 400 children attending school today. Cup of Uji, Swahili for cup of porridge, is Francis Amonde's brainchild, a school feeding project that he started in 2011 after noticing a gap in his home in Western Kenya. Many children looked dull and disengaged by mid-morning due to hunger.
A Cup of Uji basically is an initiative that seeks to fight short-term hunger among less privileged primary school children in Kenya. And at the same time, it seeks to drive education, because when they come to school and at least they have something, they can at least concentrate in class.
A 2018 study by the World Bank indicates that school feeding programs have been effective in improving the nutrition of the beneficiaries, as well as boosting enrollment and retention in schools. Schools like the Love School Center are, however, not catered for under the Kenyan government program, which mainly offers a hot meal to children in arid areas. The director of the school, however, says the needs here are immense.
Background of the children, most of them are HIV, and also others are orphans and disabled.
9 a.m. and the children stampede out of class towards the two big saucepans filled with what may be the only meal of the day for some. One by one, Francis and the teachers serve the pupils. This is replicated in several schools that he supports.
Right now we have like 8 schools that are spread across 6 counties, and we have 3,793 children that receive porridge every single morning in school, and that is far from the 100 children that we started with.
Francis, a mass communication graduate, works as a freelance social media manager. He depends on well-wishers through online donations to keep the program up and running.
In the schools that we are assisting, the kids are more healthy than what we used to see previously. Absenteeism rates almost zero, because they look forward to coming to school. Like, there's always porridge, so that is something to look forward to.
Before, they were coming, they were absent. But when the Uji cup is here, nobody will be absent.
The porridge is sweet. It has helped me to be active in class.
That the success story of the life-changing cup of porridge. From 100 children in 2011, Francis now feeds just over 3,900 children in 6 counties across Kenya. And these children are able to attend school more and even concentrate better, and their grades, according to their teachers, have markedly improved. Sarah Kimani, SABC News in Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, in Egypt will hand over the chairmanship of the African Union to South Africa next month. President Cyril Ramaphosa and his Egyptian counterpart, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, will meet on the sidelines of the AU summit as part of strengthening relations between the two countries. Our foreign editor, Sophie Mukwena, compiled this report.
From Cape to Cairo, a dream or a reality?
Egypt Air is the only carrier that is functioning and working between Cairo and South Africa. It's a dream always to have Cairo, South Africa. The Cairo-Cape road is a dream. The Cairo-Cape flights is a dream. So we are now fulfilling our dreams. We are bringing in to truth, and we are having all the support. Yes, the Cairo International Airport is a very well-prepared airport, the same as Johannesburg Airport here. I hope that one day we'll also know that we are traveling or flying from Cairo or Alexandria to Cape Town. This would be a very nice step toward pushing tourism between Egypt and South Africa.
This will be Cape to Cairo dream.
Yes, exactly. This dream is now on reality. The road is almost finished. So I want to give you a good news that the two presidents, when they meet in Addis Ababa, they will announce that Cairo Cape is a functioning project, almost finished, and let's hope that this will strengthen and enhance the trade and relations between Egypt and South Africa and the neighboring countries between Egypt and South Africa.
Next month, North Africa will hand over AU chair to Southern Africa.
We have worked hard through the last year to fulfill our obligation and to bring the dreams of the people of Africa into reality. We have priorities. We have the priority of peace and security in the continent, which will be continued with South Africa with the silence of the guns. And we have also the free trade agreement, continental agreement, which entered into force during the chairmanship of Egypt, and it will be implemented during the chairmanship of South Africa. So we are continuing our work. Egypt and South Africa, the chemistry between the two presidents is in the highest level.
This comes as civil war continues to rage in Libya.
We're working hard with the international community and with our brothers in Africa in order to find a way out of this disaster in Libya. Egypt have been participating in the last Berlin conference. It took place. President Sisi was there. They agreed on continuing to enhance the ceasefire between the two conflicting parties. President Ramaphosa was invited in last February, to attend a meeting about Libya. The Libyan crisis is not a simple crisis to be solved between a night and a day. It needs hard work, not only from the African countries, but from the international community. If we're saying that African solutions for African problems, but unfortunately the Libyan problem is a proxy war. People are fighting there, and I think that the interest of the Libyan people is to stop this fight, to stop the bloodshed, and to look for the integrity of and the unity of the Libyan people.
The United Nations Secretary General has lambasted foreign countries for violating the UN arms embargo by selling arms to rebels.
It is a shame that in Libya foreign forces have been intervening for so many years. We have a very big interest in bringing peace to Libya and making sure that foreign interventions, both military, politically or other, are ending. And all the leaders around the table in Berlin, led by the German Chancellor and by the French President, agreed that that is the way to go for Libya.
The Libyan people has been suffering for too long. It's clearly a Libyan issue, an African issue, a European issue also, because Libya is a neighboring country for Europe. And when there is traffic of weapons, ammunition, terrorist groups, armed groups involved, it's a great problem for the security of Europe. So we have to be involved, and we believe in a UN-led process.
The South African president says Pretoria stands ready to lead the continental body. Former South African President Thabo Mbeki was the first AU chair. This after its launch in Durban, South Africa in 2002.
In pursuance of South Africa's chairing of the AU, we will work with progressive political parties. We will work with a number of countries to ensure that we achieve the overarching goal of the African Union, which is silencing the guns on our continent. Already, the challenges in this regard are quite enormous, as there are a number of conflicts that are still raging on our continent. We are committed to Africa's economic development, a goal that we will seek to pursue as chair of the African Union. The economic, social, and political integration will be prominent in the work that we will be doing, particularly on the economic side in relation to the implementation of the Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement.
Sophie Mkwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And the Egyptian ambassador to South Africa, Sheriff Issa, now joins us in studio. Good evening and welcome to African Perspective. We're starting off the show with a song speaking about, or singing rather, the lyrics from Cape to Cairo. And Egypt Air is going to be celebrating that soon, just after that meeting between President Al-Sisi as well as President Cyril Ramaphosa. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
What does this moment mean?
It means a lot. It's as we said, and I'm always saying that Cape to Cairo was a dream.
Yeah.
This road is a dream not only for Egypt and South Africa, but for the whole continent. And fulfilling this dream and bringing it to be a true is approaching. This year, we can say that almost the project is almost finished. Just few parts of the road is not yet completed, but I hope that during this year it will be completed and we can inaugurate the road to say that Cape to Cairo is functioning.
Yeah, and it should happen in the year 2020.
I hope under the leadership of President Ramaphosa, yes.
Okay, and speaking about Egypt Air and how Egypt Air has been able to turn, after years of going through turbulence, it seems that the airline has been able to turn the tide as well, quite successfully at that. And comparing it to, for instance, what's currently happening in our country, in South Africa, what is it that the leadership did to ensure that there's a turnaround strategy that is implementable to such a point that Egypt Air could even start dreaming about this vision of a Cape to Cairo route?
Egypt Air have been doing a great job since '91 in South Africa. In South Africa especially. We received the first tourist group coming from South Africa in '91. After a long boycott period because of the discrimination regime in South Africa. Sure. In '92, we start functioning as a regular flight between Egypt and South Africa. So we can say that Egypt Air have been linking South Africa to Egypt and to the external world. If we say that 63% of the passengers on board of the flights coming from South Africa are behind Cairo. They're moving from Cairo as a transit going to different parts of the world. So how we have achieved the success, last year we have, there was the budget of Egypt Air, for the first time we had seen a successful budget of Egypt Air. How we did it?
Is this a budget coming from government?
No. No, it's in a self-financed company. Also, Egypt Air have been improving the fleet. We are 64 aircrafts now. We are going to reach 90 this year. Destinations have been expanded, especially in Africa. We are opening new lines. We are opening new lines to the east of Africa, to the west of Africa. Maybe we'll include Angola also for the south of Africa. In Europe, new lines like Durban, in Scotland. So we are working hard for this.
Speaking about the role, yesterday I was listening to our Reserve Bank Governor Lesitsha Kganyago, and he was speaking about South Africa, for South Africa's tourism assets, and saying that South Africa's tourism assets are good, and I guess one of those tourism assets being SAA, which plays quite a crucial role. Yeah. I wonder, when it comes to Egypt, after the Arab Spring, how much was tourism affected, and through the airline as well?
It was highly affected. In 2011, we went down to maybe 2.5 million tourism. After, in 2010, it was almost 18 million. So we lost 16 million tourists coming to Egypt every year. This year, we have reached again 14.5 million. and we are moving ahead in order to increase the numbers. We are inaugurating this year the new museum, the Grand Egyptian Museum, which will be a great attractive tourist spot for everyone visiting Egypt. So we hope that the number of tourism will rise. South Africa is working hard also to attract a number of tourism. And I know that President Ramaphosa is concentrating on this field of attracting tourism to South Africa.
Yeah. And with that said, of course, when it comes to tourism, what tourists want to see is stability. They want to know that there is peace. But it would almost seem that there is fear even from the Egyptian government itself that what's currently happening with your western border, with your western neighbor, Libya, could just have a spill-on effect and find itself playing out in Egypt as well.
I may not agree very much with this, say, because Egypt have been stable internally completely, and tourists have been witnessing stability in Egypt, and they're, so safe in Egypt to visit Egypt, all the parts of Egypt. The desert area between the borders in the west of Egypt or the east of Libya is the distance is like 500 kilometers, 600 kilometers till you reach the first inhabited areas in Egypt. So I don't think there's a threat coming from this side, except, as you know, that the situation in Libya, and maybe this will be one of your questions, the situation in Libya and the 1,200 kilometers of borders between Egypt and Libya might be a chance for the terrorist groups to smuggle some weapons and so on. And Egypt have stopped 3,000 vehicles carrying arms trying to cross the borders between Egypt and Libya.
So that route is accessible?
It is very difficult. It is very difficult, but also with the control of the army, of the Egyptian army on the borders, it is safe. I assure the tourism and tourists that Egypt is very safe. It's so safe. Even in Sinai, nothing happened for the last year, and we hope that this will continue.
And what's the extent of Egypt's intervention in Libya?
No, we are not intervening into Libya. Let's, before saying intervening or not, say that Egypt looks to the Libyan crisis as a matter of national security as a start. Why? Because I said it's 1,200 kilometers of borders. The second thing, how can we guarantee the national security of Egypt, is with the stability of Libya. Stability in Libya needs the integrity and unity of the land, integrity and unity of the people, integrity and unity of the resources, integrity and unity of the army. Those are the main things. We are not taking line with
when you refer to the army, are you referring to the National Libyan Army?
Yes, I'm not speaking about any guerrilla warriors or any terrorist groups that works in Libya, because those are people who should leave because they are foreigners fighting in Libya. They should leave Libya. The other militant groups in Libya, the Libyan militant groups working there, they should be finding a way to integrate into the army. And this is the only way to keep Libya apart. I mean, in one part, not to divide Libya into parts, 3 parts, like what is planning for Libya.
Is Egypt at all supporting the national? Is Libya at all supporting General Haftar with any military equipment at the moment?
No.
So that accusation is false.
No.
So again, I'm going to ask, what's the extent of Egypt's assistance? Let me say assistance in Libya.
If you want to speak politically, I can tell you that that Egypt in February 2019 have hosted a consultative meeting attended by President Ramaphosa in Egypt concerning Libya. And then, as we are speaking now, tomorrow we will have a meeting for the neighboring country of Libya in Algeria. And after a few days, we'll have another meeting in Congo-Brazzaville concerning also Libya. So we are working hard to solve the Libyan problem in the context of the African continent. In the same time, because the Libyan crisis have been an international one, as you have heard the foreign minister of France speaking about Libya as a neighbor of Europe. Yes, we cannot ignore that any illegal immigrants and smuggling and the human trafficking coming from Libya will reach Europe in few hours. So this is a concern. Also, the foreign fighters coming from different places to fight in Libya. This is bringing Libya to be a proxy war. So we need to stop all this. As I said, unity of the and integrity of the land, unity and integrity of the people.
As it stands at the moment, which part of the two factions is it that Egypt recognizes as the legitimate government of Libya?
We cannot say that we have two legitimate governments. The Sarraj government was there and was chosen according to the Sukhairat agreement. And it was chosen by the parliament. The parliament is the only body now in Libya that has been elected by the Libyan people. And that's why when the speaker of the parliament visited Egypt, the Libyan speaker of the parliament visited Egypt, he asked us, the assistant, and they may ask the assistant of Egypt, we are not interfering into Libya directly, but we want to support the Libyan people and the Libyan unification of the government and the army, and to unify the resources also. How can we distribute the resources in an equitable way?
Yeah. Let's just quickly touch on the Libya Peace Summit that took place in Berlin and the outcomes of that summit. And although there was a ceasefire agreement on the table, at least, you have Haftar, who's decided not to sign that particular agreement. I wonder what Egypt's view is on this and what the way forward should be to try and find stability.
Do you allow me to correct this again? Because there was no ceasefire agreement on the table in Berlin. It was in Moscow before, but not in Berlin. Berlin, it was an international meeting with Haftar and Sarraj attending the meeting in the side rooms, and the international community agreed on many principles that needed to be implemented in order to keep the ceasefire and to find a way out of this crisis.
I thought there was a truce.
No. There was that was in Moscow.
So the Moscow one was a truce.
It was?
It was a truce.
Yes.
I understood it to be a truce, and understood that on this particular one there was negotiations around a permanent ceasefire agreement. Negotiations around a permanent ceasefire agreement. And then Haftar refused to sign that.
Because it was not a simple ceasefire agreement. It was also filled of obligations that the two parties should stick to. Haftar did not accept the obligations that was in this agreement, and he left without signing this.
Sure.
I mean, it is not a position that I can comment on. This is a Libyan position, but I can only say that the Berlin Agreement or the Berlin Declaration is now on the table, and we need to implement this agreement.
How do you think the African Union can assist? And I know that Moussa Faki was also there as well.
Yes. So, as I said, 5 days from now, there will be a meeting in Congo-Brazzaville. This is under the African Union umbrella, attended by 10 presidents. One of them is President El-Sisi, and the other is President Ramaphosa. They will be there. They will discuss the issue. If this meeting will take place in the coming 5 days, I'm not yet confirmed that President Sisi will be participating. If this meeting will take place, I'm sure that the participation will be on the highest level. So this is a part of the African solutions for the African problem.
And on top of that, of course, is the year 2020, and we know as part of the Agenda 2063 declaration, the call was that by the year 2020, the guns should be silent. But of course, what's happening in Libya, what's happening in Mali, what's happening in other parts of the continent, including the DRC as well, we are not seeing that happening. Where do you think the fault lines are?
Let's be optimistic. Let's say that the leadership of President Ramaphosa to the African Union for the coming year, with the slogan of silencing the gun, is something that we really support. We have been working for peace and security and stability during our chairmanship, in Egyptian chairmanship, and we will follow it with the silence of the guns. This will complete each other. Let's be optimistic, and I know that we have many hot spots in Africa. As you mentioned, we have the Somalia, we have the South Sudan issue, we have the Central Republic of Africa, Central African Republic. So we have many hot spots. So we wish President Ramaphosa all the best in order to fulfill the obligation of silencing the gun.
And one important aspect of what's been happening this year as well is, of course, the implementation of the free trade agreement.
Yes.
How do you see that playing out?
It entered into force during our chairmanship of the African Union, and now it is the role of South Africa is to implement the agreement. The agreement is not a simple one. It needs the coordination between the RICs, which is the regional economic committees, and the African Union. So this coordination have been agreed upon in Niger, July last year, and it will be implemented during the coming summit and adopted, and then we can expect from South Africa to start implementing the agreement.
Yeah. How soon do you think it may be feasible and the continent itself can start feeling the impact of the free trade agreement, considering as well that some people are benchmarking it to the European Union? I don't know how fair that is.
The European Union took years and years, maybe 50 years, in order to come to the stage now that we are in now. So don't rush things. It is phases, and we are continuous. We are continuing our work together. Our work should be continued by President Ramaphosa, and the successor of South Africa should also continue the efforts. It will take years, but it will fulfill the ambitions of the African people in the African continent.
We had the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, who was in the country not so long ago, Abiy Ahmed, and he spoke about the tension. Let's call it the tension between Egypt as well as Ethiopia around the Nile River. And the suggestion that he made was that the intervention of President Cyril Ramaphosa to act as a mediator. I don't know if this has ever gone to President El-Sisi as well. Has this been something that has been considered at all by the government of Egypt?
Let me start by saying some facts, if you allow me. That the first fact is that Egypt depends on the River Nile to receive 94% of its needs of water. The second fact is that we are recycling the water 3 and 4 times along the Nile, from the high dam down to Alexandria, 3 and 4 times to reuse the water again. We have signed an agreement in 59 to have the share of 55.5 billion cubic meters annually. When we were 23 million, now we are 103 million. So our needs for water have doubled. Those are the facts. About the Renaissance Dam, what have been done in Washington last week, and the declaration between the 3 countries, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, is giving optimism to the process. Optimism with cautious, because what we need now is to complete the agreement with many details. We have numbers to agree upon. The numbers of how much water will be embedded behind the dam, the definition of the drought, the long drought and the short drought. Many technical things have to be agreed upon. The technical teams are working now in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan in order to finalize a framework agreement in order to operate the dam during the filling. Speaking about mediation and so on, this is in the agreement signed in 2015 in Addis Ababa, in Khartoum. This agreement states in Article 10 that we need to, if there's no solution reached, we will go into a peaceful settlement of disputes, which have mediation among the means of resolving disputes. But till now, we are waiting for the Washington coming meeting to see what will happen there.
Okay. So as it stands at the moment, there's no need for any mediation, at least not from the continent.
Till now, we're not looking for mediation. We are working with the facilitation given by the United States and the World Bank.
Okay. Do you fear at all that if there's no proper solution that comes out of these negotiations, that things could just escalate? Because you had the Prime Minister, for instance, who spoke about war, that they're ready to unleash 1 million men, for instance, to go to war. And President El-Sisi said this type of talk should stop.
Our leaders are wise enough. And Abiy Ahmed have won the Nobel Peace Prize last year. And I think that with the wisdom of our presidents, there is no fear that we would not reach an agreement. I'm optimistic, and as I said, I'm optimistic with cautious that we will reach an agreement. But as I said, that we need to look at the facts. I've said in the beginning of my intervention in this issue that we need to look at those facts. And the need of Ethiopia for development is recognized by Egypt completely and totally. So it's a win-win solution. What we need is a win-win solution.
Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Thank you very much.
Well, there you have that conversation there with the ambassador from Egypt to South Africa. When we come back, we unpack that summit that took place in Berlin with Show and Bryce, please. The United Nations Security Council will deliberate on how best to support the conclusions of the Berlin Conference on Libya after a closed-door briefing by the Secretary General on Tuesday in New York. The Berlin meeting produced a communique agreed to by all major world powers, including the African Union, that calls for a permanent ceasefire in the country, respect for the Security Council mandated arms embargo, and a return to political process amongst its key resolutions. But as Sharon Bryce-Peace reports from the United Nations, producing a binding resolution to back the Berlin outcomes could be proven to be very complex.
A beginning, at least so says the UN chief, with world leaders gathered in the German capital this past weekend, promising to stop interfering in the country's civil war and vowing to uphold the much-violated arms embargo, as the Security Council met to build on the outcomes of Berlin.
There's still a long way to go. We have a truce. The truce is having some violations, but not widespread violations. They are localized until now. We need to move to a ceasefire. And from the ceasefire, we need to move a real political process. And we are not yet there. And so this meeting of the Security Council is very important. And the pressure of the international community over the parties to the conflict and those that have an influence on them to make sure that this roadmap is implemented.
The Berlin communique called for a permanent ceasefire, committed world leaders to fully respecting the arms embargo, a return to a Libyan-led and UN-supported political process, security sector reform, economic and financial reform, particularly over the country's oil wealth, and respect for international humanitarian law and human rights in Libya. You talked about the credibility. We pressed the UN chief on whether the Council had the credibility to enforce the arms embargo, given the already multiple violations by UN member states.
One thing that it's important to note is that the heads of state and government, or representatives of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, were in Berlin. They subscribed the Berlin communique, and the Berlin communique is very strong in what regards, for instance, the arms embargo that until now has been violated in forms that are totally unacceptable. So I think there is a reason to hope that conditions for a stronger consensus in the Security Council about Libya to be created.
As the focus now shifts to a product that Council members can agree on to support the Berlin outcomes, and how to get buy-in from the UN-backed government of Fayez al-Sarraj and renegade commander Khalifa Haftar.
We're looking into how do we get Sarraj and Haftar, the players itself, Libyan players. They were not in Berlin. It was all key important players. Now we are discussing how do we bring the process back home. Actually, moving from truce to ceasefire. In this case, we need General Haftar and his colleagues in the East to come to the party. Secondly, there is so many foreign fighters. What do you do with them in the ceasefire process? Secondly, you have the neighbors. You have Chad, Niger, Somalia, Sudan. You have all. What do you do with them? And fourth is the arms which are already now in Libya. What do we do with those arms?
A follow-up mechanism that could involve an observer force, if not a fully fledged peacekeeping force, as negotiations in the Council get underway. Ambassador Machila also lamented the peripheral role that had been given to African countries and the African Union in particular on the Libyan file, but suggested that sentiment was shifting as this process moved from Berlin into what he's referred to as the implementation phase. He said the African Union would have to play a central role, particularly neighboring countries of Niger, Chad, Sudan, Egypt and Algeria, among others. Quote, implementation, I think they need us. Sharon Bryce-Peace, SABC News, New York.
And we are now also learning that the foreign ministers from Libya's neighboring states will meet tomorrow as part of international efforts to reach a political settlement in the country. For more on the story, we are now joined by United Nations correspondent, that is Shoan Bryce-Pease, who joins us from New York. Good evening, Shoan, and welcome to the African Perspective. Is there any clarity at this moment around the measures the Security Council will try to agree on, and particularly if there is a permanent ceasefire agreed to by both sides?
Yeah, that's what everyone's waiting for, Aldrin. I think the next focus, and certainly members of the Security Council are waiting for the outcome of that 5+5 military commission that was set up post the Berlin conference this weekend in terms of taking this process forward from, as the Secretary General pointed out yesterday, from a truce to a permanent ceasefire. A permanent ceasefire, I think, informs how the Security Council, essentially responsible for world peace and the maintenance and security thereof, how it will respond. I was speaking to a diplomat off the record a short time ago, and the sense I am getting is that they could either move to some sort of monitoring mechanism of a ceasefire. What would that look like? Would there be peacekeepers on the ground? Would there just be political officers monitoring the implementation, of the Berlin outcomes, the 7-point Berlin communique, and then the ceasefire, or could it be in a different form? So there's a great deal of speculation as to what sort of product the Security Council would produce, but I think also will be informed by the outcome of this meeting in Algiers by the regional foreign ministers. Algeria, Egypt, Chad, Tunisia, Sudan, Mali, Niger. We expect some role for the African Union in that meeting to build maximum pressure, political pressure, on the parties to that conflict, the two warring parties in Libya. One is the UN-backed government of Fayez al-Sarraj in Tripoli, and of course the renegade Libyan National Army under Khalifa Haftar.
And with that is, of course, this latest escalation in Libya starting in April, and this was just as the UN Consultative Conference was about to go ahead within trying to find a solution to start scarring years towards that moment. Is there a sense of frustration in the corridors of the United Nations? And I ask this also on the basis of the conversation that I just had with the Egyptian ambassador, that you had, for instance, the conversation or the meeting that took place in Moscow, and there was no agreement. Now there's the meeting that took place in Berlin, and again there's no agreement. And now you're speaking about the foreign ministers meeting.
Well, the agreement that emerges from Berlin is not a ceasefire per se, but what world leaders have committed to is to stop interfering in this civil war, to finally respect this arms embargo, Aldrin, that has been in place since the ouster of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. So what you are now getting a sense of is the urgency around this matter. There is a great deal of frustration within the UN corridors, because remember, April last year, just ahead of Khalifa Haftar's offensive on Tripoli, the UN was planning a broad-based consultative peace process in Libya under the leadership of the UN the Secretary General Special Representative to Libya, Hassan Salameh. He was at the point of inviting parties to this conference when the guns started being fired on Tripoli. So there was a great deal of frustration. Libya, for the United Nations, represented one of the low-hanging fruit that could, within, say, the 18 months from April, be resolved. And of course, that didn't happen. Salameh was at the UN Security Council a short time earlier this month. Let's listen, Aldrin, to what he had to say.
What I asked the Security Council and what I asked these countries is very clear. Keep out of Libya. There is enough weapons in Libya. They don't need extra weapons. There are enough mercenaries in Libya. So stop sending mercenaries, as is the case right now, with hundreds, probably thousands, coming into the country of late. I am really angry to see that everybody wants to talk about Libya, and very few people want to talk about the Libyans. What happens to the Libyans? What happens to the million migrant workers in Libya? What happens to these guys? Why don't we ask about them? Libya is not only an oil story. Libya is not only a gas story. Libya is not only a geopolitical story. It's also a human story. and people are suffering, and for no other reason but for the fact that there is no international clear message that enough is enough.
Hassan Salame there, Aldrin, speaking post his briefing to the UN Security Council. And I think when we talk about what sort of product we can expect from this council, it has to speak to the issues that he was mentioning in that bite. He talks about African migrants. He talks about, that this is not only about Libyan oil. This is not only about Libyan gas. This is also about the people of Libya. Expect whatever product we see emerge from this council to tackle some of those complex issues.
A quick one is then, if you consider what happened in Berlin, where the negotiators, or let's call them mediators, tried to get both warring factions to sit around the table. That didn't happen. And even with this document that would lead eventually to a ceasefire agreement, again, Haftar refused to sign this document. And I wonder then, the impact of these foreign ministers will be sitting around the table, whether they'll be able to convince Haftar to sign any piece of document that would lead to a peace agreement.
The pressure comes, I think, once you are able to build an international consensus. That began to emerge after the Berlin summit. We will then get the regional countries in terms of that foreign ministers meeting in Algiers tomorrow. Maybe there can be further consensus there. And then I think the rubber stamp on all those initiatives will be the product issued by the Security Council. Probably a resolution which is legally binding. Remember, this is a council. This is the only organ of the United Nations responsible for the maintenance of peace and security, and that can issue resolutions that are binding in terms of international law. So if the Security Council were to issue a resolution that says we demand a ceasefire now or we will sanction you, parties might very well fall in line.
But how would that be any different to the 2011 embargo that was imposed? And here we have some articles as well, as some sources at least, saying that Egypt as well as France, I think, are accused, as well as Russia, are accused of sending arms into Libya. How would that be any different to an agreement that was already in place?
Fair question. I mean, we have an internationally binding resolution that created the arms embargo, and several countries that have now agreed in Berlin to enforce this arms embargo had to enforce it based on that text that was passed in 2011. So it's a fair question. The Secretary General himself pointing this out in that post-Berlin conference in Germany, sitting alongside Angela Merkel, where he talked about the credibility of the Security Council. The credibility of this council is going to continue to be undermined if they cannot enforce their own resolutions. What does it take to enforce those resolutions? A, the permanent five should not be violating those resolutions. And there has been talk that countries like France, Russia, and even the United States, to a certain extent, have not been clear in their messaging as to what they want to see in Libya. But Berlin is a turning point, certainly according to some of the interlocutors that we are talking to, the Secretary General pointing out that this is now a new beginning. Let's see what happens from here, Aldrin.
Well, certainly. We're following very closely what happens to that meeting between the foreign ministers around, this is now Libya's neighbors, who will be sitting around the table to try and find a solution and eventually probably lead to a permanent ceasefire agreement. The question is, will Haftar sign that agreement? Let's go to a quick ad break. When we come back, we focus on Lesotho. And now over to this story. The Prime Minister of Lesotho, Tom Thabane, was today interviewed by police at his office in Maseru in Lesotho. He was expected to present himself before the Deputy Police Commissioner in Lesotho at the police headquarters. The SABC has reliably learned that an alternative venue was arranged for the Prime Minister to assist the police in their investigation into the assassination of his former wife, Dipulelo Thabane. Police have also questioned senior leaders in Lesotho. She was gunned down in June 2017, 2 days before her husband's inauguration. Thabane and his current wife, Mai Ezaya, are allegedly linked to the assassination. Lesotho's First Lady is still at large. A warrant for her arrest has been issued. The 80-year-old Prime Minister has succumbed to political pressure, announcing recently that he would soon retire from his position. Our former colleague who is now with EWN. Ntakwane Ngatani joins us now in studio, and she just came back from Lesotho. Good evening, and welcome back, and welcome
Thanks,
to African Perspective.
Thank you, thank you.
Let's first start off here. That meeting that took place and the interview of the Prime Minister. Before we go to what the Attorney General had to say, what necessitated this particular interview?
Remember that if the Prime Minister had not tried to fire the police commissioner, we probably would not know that in December, the police commissioner had written a letter to the Prime Minister telling him that his cell phone was called by someone at the scene where Dipolelo Thabane was killed in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So when the police commissioner challenged his dismissal or suspension, he then filed that letter in court. That's how it came to be known by the public. So then following that, then the police then went after his wife, tried to question her, issued a warrant of arrest. She fled. We still don't know where she is. But of course then they issued a letter on Monday asking now the Prime Minister, saying that following on the letter that they wrote in December, they would like him to appear today.
With the intention of?
With the intention of, I suppose, explaining then how it is or who it is that called his cell phone, if he knows, on the day that Dipolelo Thabane was killed in June 2017.
So, and not the whereabouts of his wife?
Well, perhaps that too, because from what we understand, when the police went to look for the First Lady or to arrest her last week, the Prime Minister was at the State House, and he was with the Attorney General. We'll speak about that in a moment. But also, apparently, he refused at first for the police to enter the State House. When they eventually did, then the First Lady was nowhere to be found. So up until now, even when he goes out in public to make statements that he makes, last week he spoke as party leader, this week he spoke as Prime Minister, he says absolutely nothing about the whereabouts of his wife.
Okay, so now comes in the Attorney General. The Attorney General then sends a letter to the police headquarters questioning the intentions of the police, but also then saying that this is uncharted water and you may just bring the country into a constitutional disrepute or something along those lines. Can't remember the constitutional crisis. So on what basis then does the Attorney General send a letter to, in this particular case, an investigating officer? Let's
start with who the Attorney General is, Aldrin. First of all, on the Friday that police had gone to the State House to arrest the First Lady, the Attorney General was there. Police say that at that point he promised them that he would find the First Lady and he would make sure that she reports to the police on Monday. He later refused. He said no, he only promised to help as an ordinary citizen because the police were agitated, not as an Attorney General. However, then this letter then comes to surface today, which is quite bizarre because in Lesotho, for instance, the king has been, in the commissioner's case, the king was cited as a respondent. Prime ministers have been sued in Lesotho before in civil cases where people were challenging either the appointment of, for instance, the president of the Court of Appeal. An Attorney General at one point sued the king because the king had gone ahead and appointed a president of the Court of Appeal. So you cannot say that there's anybody, as far as the Constitution of Lesotho is concerned, who's above the law. So the letter is quite bizarre. In fact, people are quite surprised that an Attorney General would say something as serious as to say that it is undermining the executive authority of the Prime Minister to ask him to explain a serious crime.
Has the police responded?
The police have not responded to the Attorney General's letter, but we know that even subsequent to that letter, or at least following that letter, they still went ahead and interviewed the Prime Minister at a venue, we understand, at his office. Not much came out of that. You know, we don't know exactly what he said to police, but we understand that they're not quite satisfied, perhaps, with what he had to say. He mainly said that he didn't want to incriminate himself.
And we still don't know the whereabouts of Maizai?
It is speculated that she may be somewhere in the Free State. You know that in the past when Prime Minister Thabane and Maizaya fled Lesotho twice, they went and stayed in Vicksburg. And arrangements were made for them to stay there by a person who is also cited now as involved in what is called in Lesotho now state capture, a naturalized Chinese national.
Is that John?
that is John. He, in the past, had made arrangements for them to stay in Vicksburg and paid their way, paid for the house that they stayed in. So if she is in Vicksburg or in the Free State somewhere, we don't know where she would be. However, it would also be interesting because on the day that envoys of President Cyril Ramaphosa went to Lesotho, the understanding was that they would know if she's in South Africa, if there's a fugitive from justice from Lesotho who's in South Africa, they ought to take particular
I then wonder that since the arrival of the envoy, we know that they've met with the king, we know that they've met with the prime minister. At any point, did they meet with the police who are looking for this fugitive? Because you had the deputy minister of intelligence there, Zizu Koto, was part of the envoy. Were they able to share any intelligence?
We know that they didn't meet the police. They met the prime minister, they met the king, they also met the prime minister's coalition partners. You know that Lesotho is governed by 4 parties in a coalition government. So they met the coalition partners, who we understand even prior to that, they had written to the king to say that they are worried that there is a constitutional crisis in Lesotho. The prime minister has allowed his wife to go into a space that only he, as an elected office bearer, should be. We know that she goes into government offices and speaks to senior government officials and issues orders and even appoints ministers in some instances. So we know that those are the meetings that happened, and that we also know that they went to Lesotho at the request of Tom Thabane. Now, whether or not in the conversations leading to them going to Lesotho there was anything regarding a deal that should be struck for his wife's presence in South Africa, that did not come through. But of course, we are still trying to find out whether or not she's in South Africa. And if she is, then South Africa should be able to explain how it is that it has not done anything or said anything about her whereabouts.
Let's quickly then speak about the intention of, or the reason behind the special envoy going to Lesotho. And this was, we were expecting the Prime Minister to make an announcement around his early retirement. And what were the outcomes of that meeting?
I think, as we now know, Lesotho has had 2 Asante Sana moments. The first one was the party press conference, where people were really expecting the Prime Minister to give specifically timelines. We already know that he has said he wants to retire. But of course, the question is when. He had another press conference as Prime Minister, and again, we were expecting him to say when it is that he plans to retire. All we know is that he has now asked Parliament to convene to start processes towards his
Would the
retirement.
processes include the law, changing the law? Because I understand that the Constitution doesn't have anything about the Prime Minister's early retirement.
That can be argued, Aldrin, because this is not the first time that a Prime Minister is retiring. In fact, as we were having conversations, the very first Prime Minister of Lesotho who came into office in 1965 stepped down because Dr. Liaboa Jonathan initially had lost a constituency, but when there was a rerun, he then came into Parliament. So he stepped down to make way for his party leader to take over as Prime Minister. So at that point in time, if we can use that as a precedent, then we know that Lesotho Constitution allows for a Prime Minister to resign and retire. However, what some are arguing is that perhaps because the Constitution has changed and because now there is a Council of State that advises the king, maybe things are different. But of course, we have to wait and see whether or not that will happen. But at the end of the day, what the Constitution does is it gives Parliament the power to then decide who comes in after whoever retires or resigns.
Well, it's certainly a developing story. Thank you so much, Ntakwan. It's certainly a developing story, and next week, right here on African Perspective, what we'll do is that we'll give you an in-depth look into the situation in Lesotho. Thank you so much for watching the show. Really appreciate your time. And remember that if you've just joined us, you can find the full episode on YouTube on the SABC News channel. Goodbye.